Coming to you from UBN Studios in Burbank, California. You're listening to the Unsugarcoated Podcast with your host, Aalia.
What's up, everybody? How are you doing? I hope that you are having an amazingly unsugarcoated day, man. And let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. When I say that we are unsugarcoated today, we are definitely going to be a bit more unsugarcoated for you. But you know how we do. It's always in an effort to improve society. Like it's sometimes, you know, everything that we go through, I see how people treat each other. Like I observe it. I've been observing this behavior since I was a child. And I think that one of the biggest things I see now growing up in such a multicultural type of family is that like people that I really love and care about told me some really misguided information as a child. And for a long time, at times in my life, it caused me to look at people a certain way or feel a certain way or treat people a certain way because of these misguided beliefs. And, you know, I'm from Napa, California. This is the funny part. I get to hear these days, everybody loves Napa. Sorry, my voice even cracked. They're like, everybody wants to go to Napa, get your wine and your cheese on. You know, and it's very interesting because for me, growing up in Napa, and anybody from Napa, I'm from Napa, so it's like I feel like I have the opportunity to speak on this. Growing up, I saw the black kids who were bussed in from American Canyon. You know, 3 o'clock came, they better get on those buses and leave Napa. Napa was jokingly referred to as No African People Allowed. That was the acronym. Yes, Napa. That Napa Valley that you got in your wine cabinet, maybe. Now, I'm not trying to bag because thankfully there are some people who have evolved and the community has changed. I go into Napa now and I can tell you that's not the Napa I grew up in, but that's a good thing. You know, that's a good thing. So I'm happy that some people have moved on. But, you know, there's just a lot who have not. They have not moved on to seeing that really when you treat somebody, it is not about how much money they make. It is not about the color of their skin. It's not even about where they were born, you know, because America has a very high opinion of themselves. And, you know, to that, I just say we were just lucky. I was just lucky, I guess. Not that I feel I would say that if I was born in Spain or Ecuador or South or Africa, you know, I feel like I would have a sense of pride of my home. So while I don't think that it's bad that we have American pride, I think that what it actually means is not what people often act out, right, in general society. So I've invited this amazing person who I came across him on social media. Immediately loved him because he so gets it. And as opposed to talking to Black communities and saying, hey, you need to fix this, or as Chelsea Handler pointed out in her amazing documentary, Hello Privilege, It's Me, Chelsea, we shouldn't be going to the Black communities to figure out how to fix our mindsets. And when I say I'm going to tell you something. I'm not just speaking to white people. No, I'm not. I'm speaking to Middle Eastern people. I am speaking to even Asians. I am speaking to what I have observed for some reason in this lifetime. And I dare somebody to challenge this idea. Wherever I have gone most often, for whatever reason, Black people are always considered the lowest on the totem pole. And I don't understand that because the pharaohs were kings. Some of the greatest and most important pieces of our civilization came from brown and Black communities. So why do we have that opinion? You know, no matter where you go, Middle Easterners, I love you, but don't act like you don't know exactly what I'm talking about. So please, when we talk on this subject, do not think of we're just trying to beat up, throw the only racist ideology on white people alone. But definitely, I'm excited to talk with this gentleman today because, you know, he just does happen to talk to a lot of white people about white racism. So with that, I'm going to bring him on and we're going to get busy getting unsugarcoated. So here we go. The Jolly Good Ginger calls himself a reformed bigot and racist. Raised in the mountains of North Carolina with a Confederate flag in his front yard, He now spends his time educating white community on their own implicit biases, their own bigotry, and generally what racism really is about. And he has done a pretty good job so far by amassing an audience of over 1 million followers across platforms. He says his mission is to educate the masses, and here to share a conversation with me on being an advocate against racism, please welcome my friend, Jolly Good Ginger. Hello, my friend. Thank you. We have such a big audience in here. Everybody quiet down now. I get it. So, Jolly, tell our audience where you're speaking to us from today.
I am in Virginia. That's where I currently live, in Richmond, Virginia, the RVA.
Wow. Well, you couldn't be in a more interesting place to be focused on, the subject matter you often are. Let me kind of give our audience, a little, just, I guess, a background on yourself. I know I just kind of glossed over, but, if you wouldn't mind sharing what was it that triggered this kind of evolution for yourself? Like when you were just regular Jolly, what was that like?
So, as you said, I was raised in the mountains, North Carolina. And, where I grew up, it was my neighborhood, my town, it's all white, and there's a Confederate flag in my front yard, and this was just life, right? This is life as I knew it. And I did not know, but I was learning racism just through living in this sundown town, right? The N-word was casual conversation. I tell people all the time, white people don't just say the N-word when they're angry or want to insult somebody. They casually say it. And I do understand that where I grew up is the extreme side of racism. I often hear white people say, well, I didn't grow up in a place like that, right? But as white people, we have to understand that those implicit biases run through our society at different spots on the spectrum. But nonetheless, my dad and my mom divorced when I was 3 years old. So that's the most important part of my story, because my mom remarried to a black man. And my dad has always been racist. And then that just kind of cranked it up a notch, because, everybody in the mountain would say, oh, your wife left you for a black man, which, by the way, that's the trope, right? That black men are trying to steal white women.
Right.
And so, it just kind of amped things up for my dad. Went to court. My dad got custody of me. And everybody knows that he got custody. It was very uncommon in the 80s for the dad to get custody. But my mom was remarried to a black man. The judge isn't going to give a white woman and a black man the white child. So my dad got me. And so he taught me racism. I was very racist. I was told that my mom's marriage was not sanctified by God, because God himself is against interracial marriages, and that all of her children were bastards. So when I was 10 years old, she went to court and she got custody or visitation rights of me. And the first time I met her, I called her an N-word lover, and I called her children N-words. And my hope was that she would never see me again, because I hated her. But she did keep seeing me. Every 2 weeks, she came and picked me up. And as I got to know my mom, and more importantly, got to know my siblings, she had 3 other children at the time with her second husband. And I got to know my siblings, and I got to know everybody in the neighborhood. It was an all-black neighborhood. And it became real clear to me that what my dad had, and my uncle and my cousins and everybody had been saying about what happens in black communities wasn't what was happening, right? Everybody was nice. We played together. We were just kids. And I was young at the time, 12, 13 years old, and I really began questioning what had been taught to me. So I had an option to make. What I'm observing with my own eyes, or what my dad's told me my whole life. And I decided to choose, the fact that's right in front of my face. And I began rejecting my dad's ideologies and kind of educating myself out of the hole. And I've spent the last, 22, 23 years on that journey.
I am blown away by this for multiple reasons, because so my second novel that I won 3 international awards on, it has 2 timelines. I'm telling you this, because this is a trip to me. And I knew when I write these stories, it's fiction, but I'm like, but somewhere this is real. And so it was based on 2 timelines, a 14-year-old boy in 1937 being, idolizing Hitler. He was a Hitler youth. Second timeline was 2017 out of Atlanta, Georgia, a 14-year-old boy who had been told that Muslims were bad, and he was planted in a house as a foster kid, and he was but he was there to expose that they were really terrorists. And what was interesting is, as part of like our publicity for the book, it's the journey of these two boys coming to do exactly what you said. That was my purpose. You're being told one thing because that's what I experienced, and my family loved me. Wasn't that they hated me. Your dad probably loved you, really thought that this ideology, but the fact that you really did have the opportunity to see with your own eyes, and that's what the journey is in these books. Each kid goes into these settings that they were taught to hate, and as they start to have experiences, the truth, and they have to pick, am I going to pick the lie, or am I going to pick the, what I'm seeing and experiencing? So I commend you so much. I'm really kind of blown away because you're a living version of what I wrote about. So okay, so let's talk. So you have this experience, you grow up, you've really, I don't know, how long have you really been like in activism, and did something trigger that, such as, George Floyd, to where you really became more vocal, or were you just, what was that step for you? How did that happen?
Well, like I say, in terms of speaking out on racial issues and racial inequality, I've been on that journey for 22 years now. You know what I mean? I kind of say 22 years because I look at the age of 15 as kind of the turning point for me. I told my dad, Dad, I don't want you to say the N-word in front of me anymore. That did not go over well. In fact, it went over quite poorly for me, but that's okay, because for me, that was hey, I'm standing my ground. And from there, I just kind of been on this journey of learning and education. I tell everybody, people say, are you a racist? To white people, ask white people, are you a racist? And I hate that question. It's not a yes or no question. It's racism is a spectrum. And if you treat it like a yes or no question, we're treating racism like a light switch. Either you're racist or you're not. And that's a very egregious misunderstanding of what racism is. So I don't like to say, I don't like to use language like it's over. No, it's a constant journey. I'm always learning. In terms of activism, I joined the Army when I was 18, and I spent 13 years in the Army. So in my early years in the Army, I didn't do a lot of, I would say activism. I didn't really do that because, really the Army frowns upon being too involved in political movements or human rights movements or anything. So you just kind of keep to yourself. Now, within my group, I was always the guy who would, wax philosophical every time we're sitting around drinking beers, and that was just me. So I've always been outspoken, but I've always tried to take the opportunity to learn. And so I didn't feel comfortable speaking out for many years, because I think you got 2 ears for a reason. You should listen twice as much as you talk. Mm-hmm. And so later in my military career, I attended a few rallies where there was protests going on nearby. And I felt that, I felt passionate about what they were protesting. So I joined the protest. And then once you start protesting, it kind of gets in your blood. Then I would start joining the petitions and going door to door and get people to sign stuff and just being involved. And that was 2010-ish, 11-ish, that time frame. So getting more involved that way. And then as I got out of the Army and transitioned into civilian life and having a lot more freedom, I got out of the Army in 2014. And the more freedom I had, the more involved I tried to get in local activism. I believe local activism is very important. So I've done a lot of stuff. So yeah, it was well before last year. I know a lot of people got involved last year. And I say whatever it takes to get people involved, great. The problem is a lot of white people got involved last year. And white people went from not acknowledging systemic racism to, okay, I acknowledge it now, let me tell everybody about it, right? They were overnight experts, and that really does a lot of harm to the movement. But I've been doing it for a long time.
I love that point that you brought up several amazing points. One of the military, I feel, and my stepfather was a Marine veteran. I feel that when he spoke of military, there was, when he was in Vietnam, you weren't looking at the person handing, in the bush with you of like, oh, well, what color are you? I mean, I feel like that's it levels the playing field a lot to some degree, I would feel like. So, I mean, yet I know that people still harbor their prejudices in every segment, but it's interesting that you had, you made me think of that. So when people do want to get involved, what can they do? And then to the point, like is it white splaining that we're going to call it white splaining that people do? How can we avoid that when we're trying to be an ally to this community?
Well, I tell a lot of people this, and it can come off the wrong way, so don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But it's not our job to be an ally to a community, because no community is out here saying, "Hey, white people, please come save our community," right?
Right.
And I want people to see too many people going this, I'm going to help the black community. Why? Did the black community ask you? Why don't you stop and understand where the racism is originating? What's the source of it? It's white America. It's our community. And so, if you want to help anybody, then you dismantle white supremacy from within white America. That's why I say all the time, I'm not going to speak for black people, over black people, at black people. I'm going to speak to and at white America. And I'm going to tell white America to wake the hell up. I say that a lot. White supremacy begins and ends in white America. You were talking earlier about you don't believe that it's such a bad thing to be, have pride in your country. And I talk about that a lot because there's a fine line between pride in your country and nationalism. Nationalism is harmful. Nationalism is really just white supremacy with a fancy name. Yeah. And so, if a white person, and that's who I speak to and for and at, and that's what I'm making my mission, gets involved in this movement, there's three things. Number one, if you are going to join this movement, the movement for human rights, the movement for social equity, then to do so, you must first understand the problem. And the problem is we have a human rights crisis in this country.
Yes. That's
the problem. We have a human rights crisis. Too often we mince words. Too often we get hung up on these little topics. Are you talking about the police? Are you talking about? No, I'm talking about a human rights crisis by way of systemic racism, marginalization, and oppression. And so, number one, you have to understand that, because I'm not going to debate the problem with you. I'm only going to debate the solution with you. So once you understand that there's a human rights crisis, then naturally, as a human, you would do anything to stop that. So rather than asking, how do I help the black community? No, ask, how do I stop this human rights crisis? And then I'll tell you the answer. The answer is to dismantle white supremacy from within the white community. Save your empathy and fix your cousins, right? I say it all the time. I hear white people say, I was raised around racists. I know what they look like. No, you were raised by racists. Unless your household was, I don't know, the local anti-racism center, unless your mom and dad were holding protests on the corner of the neighborhood where everybody else is racist but them, then you were also racist, because birds of a feather flock together. So people that were raised around racists were also raised by them. That's why you were in the same neighborhood. And so understanding that, like you said earlier, people teach hate and still love you. I say that all the time. I say I love racists. You know why? Because racists hugged me when I cried, bandaged my knee when I scraped it. Racists, put food on the table and kept the lights on. Racists bought me new clothes for school. Racists were there at my graduation from basic training to hug my neck and say, good job. The implicit biases and stereotypes and the existence of racism within a person is mutually exclusive from the person and the personality. Some people embrace it more and go to that extreme end, and that's when the racism defines the person. But a whole lot more people fall in that spectrum in the middle, where overall they're good people. Like you said, your uncle, you don't look in the bush and see the color of the person in uniform. I think that that's a very elementary understanding of racism. Too many people say, well, I got a black friend, or I got this. Right. Because on an individual basis, when you meet people, you may judge them by how they treat you or how they treat each other. But the people you haven't met that you heard got arrested by the police and killed, your first thought is, well, they were probably resistant. Right. So these implicit biases show their face no matter about your individual interpersonal relationships. See, racism is not how this idea of racism, that it's just a guy in a Klan hood riding down the street on a horse, burning a cross, and rejects everybody of another race. That's not racism. Racism is a spectrum. And for a lot of people growing up in white America, we learn without whether we realize it or not, hey, be careful over there. That's the bad part of town. And the bad part of town is always the predominantly black part of town, right? Or we hear our mom and dad say, well, they're just lazy. oh, look at those thugs, look at these gangsters. They might not be teaching racism by way of saying, hey, black people are inferior to us. But what you're teaching by way of casual racism is that, well, everybody with their pants sagging down is a thug. And a thug is somebody who does this. And it becomes this chain. And then white people have this implicit bias in them. So when they meet a black person, as long as the black person doesn't act that way, then we'll see. I'm friends with black people.
Yeah.
But as soon as they fall away from the standard of their whiteness, now they're everything they heard mom and dad talking about. And so it's a nuanced, complex conversation that people want to put black and white, no pun intended, but a black and white, two-dimensional approach on it. And so for white America, if you want to get involved, then get involved with white America and dismantle racism from within.
I love it. Oh my God. And you said it so true. And I love that you even said it as a spectrum. I think of narcissism in a spectrum. So, I mean, it makes such sense.
True.
Not
Right.
everybody. And, I had that family that was, they liked black people. We joke about that all the time of like, oh yeah, but don't try to marry into our family. And, that was where you drew the line. So I know what you mean, or this idea. And look, my oldest daughter has some black in her, okay? And my grandmother, when she found out, I happened to be at her home because I was on bed rest. They had told me if I was didn't get in bed, I was going to lose the child. I'd already had 2 miscarriages. My grandmother, for whatever reason, she got it in her head that he was like a black man. And I was like, because they weren't at my wedding, that, we had only just really restructured, like piecing back together this relationship. And she threw me out. I was pregnant. She said, get out. And I'm like, what about my stuff? She said, come back in a few hours. It'll be in a box on the porch. Your grandfather would flip in his grave, because that was the part. It was such a, and so thinking of the trauma of how that made me feel, my child was being discriminated against in my stomach for something that, first of all, wasn't even 100% true, but that didn't matter to my family, right? It didn't matter if it was a minuscule or a lot. And so I understand what you're saying, and I think that's why it's so harmful. I love that you do, people, I think that we look, and I'm just going to be candid, we look for the way to, because, I will agree with you. I'm helping everybody, brown, black, it doesn't matter. But because I know that there is this stigma, there is this racism, I want to take it head on. But I love that you said what you said, because it's incredibly true. So, the way that you speak on it, you've spoken in front of audiences. What's the response? You by proxy have to get. I know you talk to white Americans, but just out of curiosity, what's the response that you get? Well, what's the response that you get from a lot of white American? And then, in the same vein, what is the response that you get from, the black community who see at least your effort, whether they ask for it or not?
Well, white America is quite mixed in their response, right? When it comes to social media, I get death threats daily. I get hate mail daily. That's a daily occurrence for me. And I don't care. Like, I know some people say that stuff and they want it to be this really deep thing. To me, it's not deep. I don't care. If you email me that you're going to kill me, that means you're not going to. Because the people that are going to, you're not going to tell you ahead of time. So it doesn't bother me that you sent a death threat to me. It just shows your white fragility. But then you have those white people that say, hey, man, and I got a lot of these, that say, hey, before I heard you speak, before I started watching your content, I didn't have the courage to speak up. And to a degree, I didn't even realize my own implicit biases. I now see them. I now see my mom's racist. I didn't see that before. And now I have a way to address it. So I see a lot of people. I see both sides. I see a lot of people who, get my message and then find a way within themselves to start learning and speaking to their family, which is exactly what I want to accomplish. And I see a lot of people who reject it, and that's okay. People say to me, hey, Jolly, what if you use softer language? I do use harsh language. I'm gonna call a white supremacist. And the reason for that is it's like water going through a filter, right? So the water that comes through the filter is clean and ready for consumption. And the stuff that gets stuck in the filter is the bad stuff. So when I speak harshly to white America, the people that get stuck up here and give me death threats and hate me are not the ones I want to talk to anyway, right? I need you to have some level of self-introspection before we can really educate you. And so the people that come through that filter and say, okay, what do you mean? And are willing to have a willing conversation are those people that are going to learn. And one by one, we're going to chip away, and the white supremacist days are numbered. And before I die, we will end white supremacy. But there was something else you said, and I forgot.
How does Black America?
That's right. Yeah. So I get a lot of people that say to me, and I get this a lot. Well, I've never heard a white person speak like you. I never heard a white person put it the way you put it, or I never heard a white person understand it the way you do. Part of that, quite frankly, is, as I told you, I do have siblings that are mixed Black and white. And after I established my relationship with my mother and, shunned the teachings of my dad, I got real close with my siblings. As a matter of fact, my brother is one of my best friends. I don't really have a best friend per se. So my brother's kind of it, that's my best friend. I talk to him about every day. And growing up and going through life, I, like everybody else, went through cycles of identity crisis, especially as a teenager who just figured out that there's two Americas, white America and then everybody else. I went through the entire identity crisis. What does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be me? What does it mean to not be white? And I went in, but along the way, I had my brothers and my sisters right there with me the whole time. And we talk a lot. We communicate. They give me stuff from their perspective because in America, they're Black. Nobody's looked at my brothers and sisters and said, there's a white guy. It never happened, right? They're Black. Right. And so I get it from my brother's perspective. As things happen in my early 20s, things are happening. I'm talking to my brother about it. He's giving me another perspective I never thought of. And so when you have that kind of relationship and that kind of exposure and the amount of time that I've been, doing it, you kind of start getting it, you know what I mean? So for the most part, that's what people say to me, man. You really get it, you know what I mean? And I appreciate that. I appreciate that people, are actually listening to my message. So yeah,
it's incredible. I see it, and there's a lot of cultural things that you talk about as well, that even because there is systemic racism that really does exist, it is sad that not only are people do not have access to the education and information, it's on top of it, it's this constant fight against white privilege. There's really such a thing as white privilege. In your opinion, what is white privilege and how did we arrive at this situation? Like, we came here, like my aunt who was bagging on, anybody leaving a nightmare to come to a country to have a dream or a chance at something outside of, machetes hacking their kids in the streets is like, to them, it's just the horrible, they hijack the narrative. But I'm like, but wait, did we have immigration? Like, because I know Columbus or anybody, Columbus never technically hit the U.S. But anyways, what I'm saying, the colonials, the whatever you want to call them, they were murderers. They did not come here legally. So where did white privilege come from?
White being the standard of life. That's white privilege. White privilege is regulations on Black hair in the workplace. Why? Because white hair is the standard. White privilege is, you're not going to get the job if you don't speak like me, if you use colloquial terms I'm not familiar with, if you have an accent I'm not familiar with. Social media has developed the term Black scent, right? When you have an accent different than me, white America, you're not getting the job. When you dress different than me, you're judged. White privilege is whiteness being the standard of life. This is what I try to get white people to understand, because you'll hear a lot of people say privilege means that your life can still be hard, but your race isn't part of the reason. And that's a good way to put it. But I'm here to tell you that doesn't register with white America. When you say that to white America, one ear out the other. They're not going to get that, because white America says, well, you're just pulling the race card. Okay. So you got to change the language. So I tell them, listen, what's the standard? I've literally had conversations with racist white people, because I love these conversations. I find the one who's the loudest in the room, who doesn't like anything I'm saying, and I sit down with them. And I say, hey, if you had a job interview tomorrow, how would you dress? Right. If you were the boss and somebody was coming to sit down, how would you want them to dress? And I have this conversation, we paint the picture. Then I say to them, now, do you understand that everything you just said is basically white? You would comb your hair. You would trim your beard. You would wear this clothes. You would do this. You would do that. You do this. You do this. So what if somebody came in with locks? Mm-hmm. What if somebody came in? Oh, well, they'll always say it. Well, why the hell would you go to a job interview with locks? Well, if 64% of America was black people and only 13% was white people, we wouldn't even be having that conversation. You have to understand that white privilege is whiteness being the standard that everything is ran off of. That's white privilege.
Yeah, and I can really appreciate that, especially when I go, I mean, look, I don't know if my mother-in-law listens to this show, and I love her. She's just such an amazing woman. And both my in-laws, they're just tremendous people, I have to say this. Tremendous. But when I go into their house, and maybe a lot of people might get mad at me for this. Sorry, not just them. You know, there's a picture of Jesus in their house that, kid you not, I'm mistaken for Brad Pitt in like Haiti or something. There's a whole family story. My mother-in-law, I was like, maybe somebody drew it in the family. I'm like, Tammy, is that Brad Pitt? And she's like, no, Aalia, that's Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. And she just keeps, plugging away at the tomato. But here's the thing, and I told her this one time, how differently would the world behave if they actually put a picture of what he really looked like? Because it's not that, right? But I agree with you. To your point, white is right. White is the standard, which I really, still going back to something I had said earlier, I don't know even, women, and unfortunately, the darker you are, because like I said, pharaohs, Egypt, the trade world back in the day was predicated upon all of the brown cultures, right? And then women were once upon queens, but yet we get to America and we're shoved in the kitchen, take your shoes off, get comfy in the kitchen, and suddenly, and everything else has subsequently happened. The culture of actually being white doesn't always have a great history. And, my daughter, she tells me I'm white passing. And I'm like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I get it. I don't get out in the sun as much. And yes, but I do not get told by white people I look like a white person. But my grandfather was blonde hair, blue eyed, German, Heiss, very, very strong background. And to me, just that white privilege was growing up, like you said, like feeling like, okay, I mean, that was one way, but I like the way you said it better. But absolutely, it was, okay, things could be worse. Like I said, if I was, I when I say that, I'm not serious, that I feel I got lucky, right? That was why I was being sarcastic. But this idea that just you're white and you're born in America somehow gives you this like leading advantage or this superiority over people. So is bullshit in a lot of, and I'm with you. I want to like dismantle.
When you talked earlier about in this other country, they're hacking people on the street, whatever. Look, in America, as a black man or brown man, if you're pulled over by the police, if it's a police-initiated interaction, you are four times more likely to experience the threat of force or the use of force. If you're a black man, you're going to be shot and killed by the police at a rate 2.87 times higher than a white man. If you're a black man in front of a judge with the same exact crime and history as this white man, you're going to get a 19.1% longer sentence 3 times more often. All right. As a black woman, pregnant, going to the hospital, you are literally 3 times more likely to die. Okay. Than a white woman. That's because doctors don't take seriously the complaints of black people. That's proven. Medical racism is a thing. If you live in a predominantly black neighborhood, you are literally 67% time higher chance of being in proximity to a power plant or a dump or something that affects your health directly. All right. Black America, 22% of Black America lives in poverty versus only 9% of white America living in poverty. That is literally 2.4 times higher poverty rate. The list goes on. So this idea that bad stuff's not happening in America is craziness to me. People are dying due to medical racism, environmental racism, racism in the justice system, racism in the policing system. People are dying.
Right.
And so to say, well, they're not dying as much as they are over there is just
no. I mean, absolutely.
Ignorant, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly. Not that you were saying that. I don't
No,
mean
no,
that at all.
no. And what you said, though, I just jumped in because what you said triggered, it is a human rights crisis. It really
Exactly.
is. We saw this through the pandemic. Who are the people who are most affected? Who are the people who died the most, who
There
are
you go.
economically, and crime is skyrocketing, and that's even further going to complicate issues. But once again, and I'm only going to bring this back to the racism, is like you said, there will be people that'll be like, oh, but they're just doing that because, they're thugs. There's things, and don't get me wrong, I'm not condoning stealing or anything like these things, but I don't think that white America really truly understands the challenges. Everything that you just listed off it's so on point and it's so real. And to know that we don't care enough, like humanity, and yet those will be the same people, and I have to bring this, they'll be the same people who are rooting for Roe v. Wade to be overturned, so that we can have orphanages filling up with kids that they're never going to care about after, that 10 or 12 weeks, whatever. Like, do you know what I mean? There's such, and so, and who do we know? And so another faction of racism, when we talk about abortion, who are going to be the communities that suffer most from that, the lack of access to the right to choose whether you want to bring another life into this world or not, which is still how I see that decision. Right?
That's what it is.
So,
right, 100%.
So I love that you speak so authentically. You have this experience. How what is your goal now? I mean, you get out there, you speak. How do we actually? And I love that your goal is we're gonna knock out Ku Klux Klan and all that white supremacy. And I'm not laughing because it's funny. I think it's very. You said people talk about you being in the South, but like I had mentioned, Napa. That's California, Northern California. People have this perception, but in reality, every time you're in a city, you may get a little bit more urban and a little bit more modern. But the minute you start driving out, totally different. You're in Kansas. You're in Kansas. You're not. So no offense to the engineer in the house who's from Kansas, but he'll be the first one to.
Kansas is actually very racist. So is Arkansas and Oklahoma and. I mean, yeah. People, like you said, people think it's limited to the South.
I feel like in the South, the only thing other than black that you could be that would get you in trouble would be gay, right? Like that's the.
You know what? It's so funny you say that. I'll tell you a quick tangent story. As a teenager, I came out and said basically, like, don't say the N-word around me. I'm not with all this, and I would argue with people and. I was very outspoken about, hey, stop being a racist. And of course, my whole family, I'm not a racist. My family would literally tell you they're not racist. That's why people got to understand, even the most extreme racists will tell you they're not racist. But anyway, they still talk to me, right? But when I was in the Army, I was in my early 20s, 21 years old. And I didn't realize I was a bigot in terms of homophobia. You don't realize it. It's just kind of a thing. And I knew that, I could still love you, love the sinner and hate the sin kind of BS that the church taught me.
Right.
But then it became a national conversation of, should we legalize gay marriage? That became the national conversation. And at the time in the Army, it was don't ask, don't tell was the policy. And I knew people in my unit that were gay, and we didn't tell on them because that's the policy. Don't tell them. You're not supposed to tell on them.
Right.
But you also can't ask. Really weird policy when you think about it. But anyway, I was always uncomfortable about it because I was raised to be a bigot. And then when the national conversation came up, the conversation started happening within the barracks. I lived in the barracks, and we shared common areas like the day room where the TV and the kitchen was and stuff. And conversations would happen. And one day I got into a conversation with one of the gay men in our unit. And, me being from the South and having a bit of a Southern accent, I don't have one now. I used to have a really heavy one. He really kind of singled me out. I was like, what do you think about it? And I hit him with all the BS. Well, I believe you can be whatever you want to be. Just don't do it around me. And, love the sinner and hate the sin kind of BS. And he just called me out. He said, okay, so you're homophobic. And I fought it. No, I'm not. But I was. And through these conversations, I figured out, I'll be damned. I'm homophobic. And so I came out one day. I said, you know what? I support gay marriage. We should legalize gay marriage. And people that knew me were like, really? I'm like, yes, hell yeah, we should. It's two grown-ass people. They're consenting with each other. Let them do what they want to do.
Right.
And I was talking to my family back home. I was stationed in California at the time. And I was talking to my family back home. And I told my dad, I said, you know what? I support gay marriage. My dad hung up on me. My family, my aunt called me. I think this the same day, next day, Russell, you understand what you're saying right now is against God's will, and it was just, I mean, literally my family was taken, they were taken aback. They couldn't deal with it, didn't know what to say, damn near shunned me when I supported gay marriage. Now, when I said I was anti-racist, it was like, okay, he's going through a phase. I'm pro-gay. Oh, God, stop.
Right. Oh, wow. Interesting.
And so
yeah,
it really is. It's real. People, I mean, white supremacy has ruled the land, but racism is still woven into our culture that they can accept it when you try to fight against that. But when you try to accept homosexuality, oh, my God.
Yeah.
You're shunned.
See, and that's the thing. I think that a lot of people, like, it's, I've been to Rome. Let's just say that. I've been to Rome. Our history and honestly, going back to the point of what you said, and I like how you said it's just stop being racist. I think our biggest problem with white America is that we think we have the right to tell other people what to do in certain aspects. And I mean, it's funny because there's a whole another layer of the conversation that goes to like people who don't want to be told to take a vaccine, of which I'm like, okay, but like in California, my kids can't go get an education without taking certain vaccines. So I'm familiar with I'm just familiar with the fact I don't actually belong to myself. Being a citizen of the United States, I've worked through the process to realize, oh, they got my butt. And, it's like, so anyways, okay, but going back to the point of, stop being racist, stop feeling, I guess not telling people so much what to do is real. What I really mean to say is more dictating what's right for other people in the sense of their culture and who they are and how they are allowed to express themselves. Because if you are not doing anything wrong, and I say this like, I'm sure, I mean, like even with God, I mean, I don't have to answer for what you do in front of God, and you don't have to answer for what I do. So why do we have this disconnect, and I feel that what the saddest part, and this is the saddest part to me about racism, aside from the tragedy of people who lose their lives over some bullshit ideology, such as racism, and from police officers and people, every day, is that everything that divides us is an illusion. I guarantee you, though, like you said, you had this experience, your mother, you sit down to eat, you're telling jokes, you're talking sports. What divides us is an illusion. And they get so caught up in those intricacies that I feel like that's why we're not able to bridge these communities. So, how do you feel we do continue to break and dismantle white supremacy?
I mean, there's a multifaceted approach, right? So not one single approach, but there's a lot of stuff we got to do. And, racism is a disease that has taken on multiple variants, right? So let's use the pandemic, the COVID as a talking
good
point,
analogy.
as an analogy,
perfect.
Right? Where, there was racism in its earliest form, which was just blatant white supremacy, enslaving people, separating people based on the word white became a race here in America for the purpose of superiority. Before that, that wasn't a thing. It was a descriptor, not a race. And then as time progressed, the language evolved, the practice of racism evolved, the implementation of white supremacy evolved. I hear white people say all the time, slavery was 400 years ago. Number one, that's factually incorrect. And number two, it's not just slavery, right? Freedom, fighting for freedom was 240 years ago. Did you fight for freedom? No, but yet you still benefit from it. Why? Because after freedom was fought for, and I use that term very loosely, after freedom was fought for, then we established laws, methodologies, systems, and practices that would continue that freedom going forward. It would ensure that the freedom that was fought for would be preserved. Mm-hmm. Same thing when slavery ended, and I put that in quotes on purpose because slavery's never ended in this country. Slavery still exists, but chattel slavery ended, then systems, ideologies, laws, and practices were put in place to preserve white superiority, right? White supremacy is not going to just be, okay, well, slavery's over, okay, we'll just be friends.
We like you guys all now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Right.
You can still see videos.
It didn't happen at all.
It didn't happen. And you can still see videos to this day of white people in the 60s and 70s during the civil rights era. They did interviews. Hey, how do you feel now that the Civil Rights Act is passed? Well, I don't like it. I'm going to have black people living next door to me. They weren't saying black people, they were saying N-word. That was in the 60s and 70s. This lady's 20 years old. Now she's 60 years old. You think she raised her children to be loving, no, her children are racist as hell. And they're my age. And they have children who are learning the same thing. This wasn't a long time ago. So just like we have a vaccination to end the pandemic, but if everybody doesn't get vaccinated, the variants keep happening. Right. Same thing with racism. The vaccination for racism is education. And if everybody doesn't get educated, then there's going to continue to be variants that we have to continue to vaccinate against or fight against. The variants continue to change. Right now, in 2021, what's the variant? Oh, I ain't got a problem with black people. It's not black people. It's the culture.
Right.
Congratulations. Right. You changed the word. It's the same word. Right? It's just the same word. You're saying the same thing a different way. Right? And that's a variant.
Right. Which, by the way, is interesting. I have a friend who he was one of the guys back in the day with the clubs where he designed a line of luxury sneakers for black men, because when you went to the club, you had to dress in your Sunday best to get in or you weren't getting in. And he observed one time where they were keeping out good people who were just there for a good time, because they were black, with sneakers. I mean, the whole church shoes was designed to keep the black guy out. And so it's interesting how, we see people constantly saying, like you said, it's their culture. And especially now that I just do not agree or do not disagree with, like you say, speaking up. And if we really believe that we live in a society where we at a minimum deserve integrity and, the right to bear arms, the right to have peace, the right to create a family for ourselves and continue that legacy, I just, we have to make it fair for everyone. So I love that you say the education, because it is a cycle we need to break. And that was incredible that you related it to the variant, because it's so true. How, when it comes to the cycle, and you brought up kids, so is going on social media. You do a lot of research. I can tell you're so knowledgeable.
Thank you.
Where do you go for your source of information? Like when we tell the kids where to go, where do you go? Because there's so much misinformation out there.
Kids? I mean, kids.
Well, when I say kids, I mean teenagers and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. Well, I got 5 kids, right? And so my kids are very aware of my activism. I'll tell you a story that just happened today. My son he had asked me a few weeks back I have a bunch of Black Lives Matter masks with different designs, but they all say Black Lives Matter. Could he have one? I said, yeah, you can have one. My son is half Korean, half white. He wore a Black Lives Matter mask to school today. He never wore it before. He said, they asked me why am I wearing a Black Lives Matter mask? I'm not black. And I said, well, what did you say to him? What was your answer? And my son said that his answer was, you can support the movement no matter who you are. And I said, man, good answer, Jaden, good answer. And then he said, I'm really surprised my teachers didn't say anything about it. I asked him, I said, what did you expect your teachers to say? He said, I expected them to say, take it off. There's no politics in the classroom. And I asked him, so what would you have said had the teacher said that? And my son said, it's not a political movement. It's a movement to fight for a community. I said, man, okay.
Wow.
So, and my son's only 11.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. That's amazing. And
so what I tell that whole story not to give myself some kind of pat on the back. I don't do that. I'm not the guy looking for pats on the back. But I tell that story because my son at 11 is able to form these answers on his own, because I make sure to simply just tell him the truth, right? So white people are extremely scared of their children being taught about racism. That's why CRT has taken the country by storm, even though it's not even being taught in school and it's the boogeyman, it's not real. But white people are petrified of what would happen if you told your children the truth.
Right.
So I tell my children the truth, and it goes a long way. I got 2 children from a previous marriage. So they spend some time at my house, some time at their mom's house. And their mom messaged me yesterday. They were walking through some store, and there was flags everywhere. One of the flags was the Black Lives Matter flag. And my youngest, who's only 5, my youngest of those 2 is only 5 years old. She said, look, Mommy, it's Daddy's flag. And she goes, oh, that's Daddy's flag? She goes, yeah. Oh. And then she goes, do you know what that means? Do you know what that says? And she said, it says Black Lives Matter. And she goes, you know what that means? And then my 8-year-old spoke up. She goes, yes, Mommy, it means that Black lives do matter. And I
love that.
And I've never sat down and said that to them or anything.
Right. You just role modeled for them.
Well, maybe that, but more than anything, I just simply tell them the truth. I
Yeah.
asked them, "Hey, what'd you learn in school today?" "Oh, right now we're studying about Thanksgiving." "Okay, cool. What'd they say about it?"
Right.
I mean, okay, well, that's BS. So let me tell you this, and that's how I talk to my children. And my son's my oldest sons, their teachers will tell you, they're like, "Yeah, your son's extremely opinionated, and he corrects us when he believes we're wrong." And I'm like, sorry, but I understand you're teaching the curriculum, and the curriculum's still whitewashed. So
Yeah.
I just think that for kids and teenagers, we need to just simply expose them to the truth. There's no deep well of knowledge we have to dive into, right?
Right.
We don't need them to read the new Jim Crow. We don't need them to study Res Momentum or anything right now. Eventually we do, but right now we don't.
Right.
But what we need is just to simply understand the truth. That's
Agreed.
a really good place to start.
Yeah, amazing. And I love that you say that. I take the same philosophy with my kids. I don't try to pretend, but okay, so thank you so much for your time with us today. We got to get out of here, but before we do, please let people know where they can find you, what platforms, check you out. Where do you like them to go?
I'm on TikTok, jolly_good_ginger. I'm on Instagram, jolly_good_ginger, and I'm on Twitter, @jollygoodginger, no underscore, because Twitter will not allow that. And I was on Facebook, but they've banned my Facebook page. So I don't have that anymore.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you, and we will definitely be talking soon. All right.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation, and thank you for having honest conversations.
Thank you. Oh, you said amazing things. Audience, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Don't forget to come back next week. Until next time, thanks for letting us be unsugarcoated.
What are you still doing here? Come back next week.